Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. Started so subtly. At first, I didn't think much of it, just harmless glances. Or so I thought. But those glances lingered. And over time, they became harder to ignore. He'd look at me like I wasn't his mother. Like he was seeing me as something else. Someone else. And for a long time, I pretended not to notice. What was I supposed to think? He's my son. My son. The idea felt ridiculous. Absurd. But once the thought crossed my mind, it never left. Followed me everywhere. In every room of this house. I started catching his eyes on me when I walked past. If I turned to him, he'd look away. But only for a second. It was almost like he wanted me to know he was watching. And as much as I tried to brush it off, I couldn't. And here's the part one hate admitting. Part of me didn't mind. Maybe I even liked it. God, even saying that makes me feel sick. But it's the truth. After years of feeling invisible, of being overlooked and forgotten, having someone look at me like that, it woke something up inside of me. Something I thought had died a long time ago. My life hasn't exactly been easy. My marriage, it decayed, fell apart after 15 years. I spent most of it trying to keep us together, trying to be everything he needed, everything he wanted, and for a while, I thought I was enough. But then the distance started. First it was little things. No goodnight kiss. No how was your day? Then came the silence. That unbearable silence that fills a room and presses down on your chest. Until you feel like you can't breathe. We stopped fighting even. Like we'd both just given up. By the end, we were strangers sharing the same house. And when he finally walked out the door for good, I didn't cry. I thought I'd feel relief. Maybe even freedom. But all I felt was this emptiness. Like I had been hollowed out. I wasn't just losing him. I was losing the version of myself I used to be. I didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't desirable. I wasn't seen. I was just a mom. And even that felt like a role I was barely holding on to. Ethan had already left for college by then. He was my only child. My baby. I raised him mostly on my own. You see, Ryan, my ex-husband, he was always more focused on his work than on us. But Ethan was my world. From the moment I held him, I knew my life would never be about me again. It would be about him. His needs. His happiness. And when he left for college, I thought, this is it. I did my job. He's off to start his life. But then, a few months ago, he came back home. He didn't tell me much. Just that college wasn't working out and he needed some time to figure things out. I didn't push him. I figured he'd talk when he was ready. That's the thing about Ethan. He's always been so quiet, so introspective. He keeps everything bottled up, until he can't anymore. I thought I knew him. I thought I understood him. But when he came back, something felt different. He wasn't the same boy I sent off to college. There was something darker about him. He seemed restless, frustrated, like he was carrying some weight he couldn't shake. He barely left the house. He'd spend hours in his room, or sitting on the couch staring at his phone, jaw tight, like he was angry at the world. I tried to reach out to him, to talk to him, but he kept me at arm's length. And then, the glances started. First I thought, maybe it was in my head. I'd catch him looking at me out of the corner of my eye. But I told myself it wasn't what it seemed. He's probably just lost in thought, I reasoned. But then, kept happening. I'd be cooking dinner and feel his eyes on my back. I'd turn around, and there he was, just watching me. Not like a son watching his mother. It was different. It felt deliberate, intense, and it made my stomach twist in a way I didn't want to admit. I should have stopped it then. I should have said something, set some kind of boundary, but I didn't, and I don't know why. Maybe it was because I felt guilty. He had just lost everything. His future, his confidence. He was trying to figure out who he was, and I didn't want to make things harder for him. Or maybe it was because deep down, I liked how it made me feel. After years of being invisible, of feeling like I was nothing more than a shadow in my own life. Someone was finally seeing me. And it wasn't just anyone. It was him. And that's the part one can't explain. The part one don't want to explain. Because it's wrong. I know it's wrong. But once I felt it, I couldn't unfeel it. And once I saw the way he looked at me, I couldn't unsee it. It was like we were both pretending not to notice what was happening. And the more we pretended, the closer it got to becoming real. I still don't know how it all went so far. How we crossed that line. But what I do know is this. After everything that's happened, nothing is the same anymore. Not with Ethan. Not with me. Not in this house. And no matter how much I want to take it back, no matter how much I want to fix it, I don't know if I can. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. That feeling you get when someone's watching you. I glanced up, and there he was, standing in the living room by the window, just staring. He didn't even look away when I saw him. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, like he wanted me to notice. And I did. God help me, I did. I felt this rush. Heat. Shame. Confusion. Something else. Something I don't even want to name. I turned away, tried to focus on what I was doing. But I couldn't shake it. His eyes were on me. I could feel them, even when I wasn't looking. And instead of telling him to stop, instead of walking inside and saying something, I stayed there. I stayed there. And let it happen. That wasn't the only time. It happened again. And again. In so many little ways. I'd be reading on the couch and I'd glance up, to find him watching me, just sitting there, silent, with this unreadable expression on his face. Or I'd be cooking in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, and I'd feel it, that same weight, that same tension. I'd turn around, and there he was, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, like he didn't have a care in the world. But his eyes said something else. They said everything he couldn't say out loud. And me? I just kept pretending not to notice. Or maybe I wasn't pretending. Maybe I just didn't know how to handle it. Because the truth is, every time it happened, it stirred something in me. Something I didn't want to admit. Something I didn't even know was still there. You see, it wasn't just about Ethan. It was about me. About everything I'd lost. Everything I thought I'd buried. My marriage. It decayed. It wasn't just a failure. It was a wound that never really healed. We used to be happy once. I can still remember the way Ryan used to look at me when we first met. Like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. He used to touch me, like I was something fragile, something he was afraid to lose. But somewhere along the way, all of that disappeared. I disappeared. I'd sit across from him at the dinner table, and he wouldn't even see me anymore. I could be wearing a new dress, doing my hair differently, trying anything to get him to notice. But he never did. He'd just stare at his phone, talk about work, or nothing at all. And every time he didn't look at me, every time he didn't touch me, felt like I was fading, like I was becoming invisible. By the end, it didn't even hurt anymore. It was just empty. And now, here I was, years later, and suddenly, someone did notice me. Someone did see me. And it wasn't just anyone. It was Ethan, my son. And I hated myself for letting it affect me the way it did. But I couldn't help it. I didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't just the looks, though. It was the little moments. The way he'd hover close to me when I was doing something around the house, offering to help with things he'd never cared about before. Like the door. One evening, the lock on the back door got stuck. I was fiddling with it, trying to fix it myself. When he walked up behind me, I didn't even hear him coming. He just appeared out of nowhere. Here, let me do it. He was standing so close. I could feel his breath on my neck. His hand brushed against mine when he reached for the screwdriver. And for a second, I froze. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. And neither did he. He was close. Too close. I knew I should have stepped back. But I didn't. And in that moment I realized he wouldn't step back either. We didn't say anything. He fixed the lock, handed me the screwdriver, and walked away. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. I don't even know what to call it. But it was there. And once it was there, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The tension in this house. It was like a thread pulled so tight. It was ready to snap. Every interaction felt loaded, like we were walking this invisible line, pretending it wasn't there. But it was. And every day, it got harder and harder to pretend. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't want to know. But deep down, I think I already knew. And that thought terrified me. That night still haunts me. It was late, close to midnight when I got home. My shift had run long. I was exhausted. My feet ached. My head was pounding. And all I wanted was to crawl into bed and forget the day. The house was dark when I walked in. And for some reason, that darkness felt heavier than usual. It wasn't the comforting silence I was used to. No, it was different. The air felt off, like something wasn't right. I set my keys down on the counter and headed to my room, barely awake. But as I got closer, I heard something. It wasn't loud, but it was there. A faint sound. Soft. Rhythmic. I froze. My first thought was that maybe I'd left a window open, that the wind was brushing the curtains. But it wasn't that. No, this sound was different. It was coming from inside my room. My heart started pounding. My body was screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to not open that door. But I couldn't stop myself. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob, and when I pushed it open, I'll never forget what I saw. I stepped inside and sat down on the edge of his bed, leaving just enough space between us to keep it from feeling too intimate. Neither of us spoke at first. We just sat there, in the dark, the silence pressing down on us, like a weight we couldn't escape. Finally, I whispered, "Talk to me." My voice came out softer than I intended, almost pleading. "I need to understand." He didn't answer right away. For a long time, he just stared at the floor. His hands clenched into fists, like he was trying to hold himself together. And then finally he said, "I don't know what's wrong with me." His voice was shaking. "I know it's messed up. I know it's wrong. But I can't stop thinking about you." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he needed to stop, that this wasn't normal. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. And admitting that, even just to myself, made me feel like the worst person in the world. We talked. Or maybe we didn't. Maybe it was only a few minutes. I honestly don't remember. I just remember the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. And I hated myself, for the way it made me feel, for the way it made me want to stay, even when I knew I should have left. By the time I got up to go, the sun was starting to rise. The light creeping through the curtains felt like a slap to the face, like the world was reminding me I couldn't hide from this forever. I walked back to my room, shut the door behind me, and as I lay down in bed, one thought kept running through my head. Nothing will ever be the same again. It happened late one night. Of course it did. Nothing good ever happens in the light of day. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, suffocating, like it's daring you to make a noise. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept circling the same thing. Him. Us. What had already been said. What hadn't been said. And everything lingering between us. Unspoken. But so loud, it was impossible to ignore. I should have gone to bed. I should have walked away before it got worse. But I didn't. I stayed. And when I heard his footsteps coming down the hall, I didn't get up. I didn't tell him to turn around and go back to his room. I just sat there, heart pounding, body tense, waiting for him to walk in. He stopped in the doorway, just standing there, like he was trying to decide if he should come in or not. I could feel his eyes on me, and it was unbearable. But I still didn't look at him. I just stared at the TV, pretending I didn't feel the air in the room change the moment he walked in. I could feel him watching me, and it was like every nerve in my body was on fire. Then, he finally spoke, and his voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Mom," like he was testing the word. Testing me. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just sat there, frozen. And then he said it again. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned my head, and when our eyes met, something inside me cracked. The look on his face, I can't even describe it. Like he was scared, but also determined. Like he didn't know what he was doing, but he couldn't stop himself. And me? I didn't know what to do either. I just sat there, staring at him, mind racing, chest so tight I could barely breathe. He took a step closer, and I didn't stop him. I should have. God knows I should have. But I didn't. I just sat there, waiting to see what he would do. And when he sat down next to me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, I still didn't move. My hands were trembling. My heart was pounding. But I stayed. I could feel him watching me. I could feel the weight of his gaze. And it was unbearable. I wanted to tell him to leave, to get up, to go back to his room, to pretend none of this was happening. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down, I didn't want him to leave. And that's the part that kills me. That's the part one can't forgive myself for. He reached out, touched my hand, and I felt my breath hitch. His touch was so light, so hesitant, like he was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I let him hold my hand, and I hated myself for the way it made me feel, for the way it made me want more, for the way it made me feel alive again. "Mom," he said it again, and his voice broke on the word. I turned to him, and the look in his eyes, I'll never forget it. He looked so nervous, so desperate, like he was reaching for something he didn't know how to find. And instead of stopping him, instead of pulling away, I let him come closer. When it happened, it didn't feel real. It was slow, hesitant, like we were both waiting for the other to stop, to pull back, to say this is wrong. But neither of us did. He was so gentle, so careful, like he was afraid of breaking me. And me, I didn't feel like myself. I felt like I was outside of my body, watching something I couldn't control. And even though I knew it was wrong, even though I knew we were crossing a line we could never come back from, I didn't stop it. I didn't want to stop it. In the middle of it all, there were the memories. They kept creeping in, uninvited, like ghosts haunting me. I kept seeing him as a little boy, running through the house, that big, toothy grin on his face, asking me to play with him, begging me to help him build his Lego sets. I kept hearing his laugh, that sweet, innocent laugh, the one that used to fill this house with so much warmth. He was my son. He is my son. And now, I couldn't even look at him without feeling like I'd ruined everything, like I'd ruined him. I kept asking myself, how did this happen? How did we get here? But deep down, I already knew the answer. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow build, a gradual unraveling, and I let it happen. I let those looks linger. I let that tension grow. I didn't stop it when I should have. And now it's too late. By the time lunch rolled around, the silence in the house was unbearable. I could hear him moving around upstairs, but he didn't come down. He didn't try to talk to me, and I didn't try to talk to him. We were both avoiding each other, circling the same guilt, the same shame, too scared to face it, too scared to face us. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. Not cleaning, not reading, not even the mindless daytime TV shows, the ones I usually put on in the background. Every little thing reminded me of him. Every sound, every smell, every tiny detail of this house screamed his name, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape him, or myself. It wasn't until the evening that I finally heard his footsteps on the stairs. My heart stopped when I heard him coming. I wasn't ready to face him. I wasn't ready to face what we'd done, but I couldn't avoid him forever. He walked into the kitchen, hands stuffed in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. And when he spoke, his voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear him. "Mom." That one word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I turned to look at him, and the expression on his face nearly broke me. He looked so lost, so ashamed, so young, like the same little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared and ask me to hold him. And all I could think about was how far we'd fallen, how far I'd let us fall. Can we talk? His voice was soft, careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I wanted to say yes. I wanted to sit him down, tell him everything would be okay, that we'd figure it out, that we'd fix this. Somehow. But I couldn't. I couldn't even look at him for more than a few seconds. I turned back to the sink and whispered, "Not now." I hated the way my voice sounded. Cold. Detached. Like I didn't care. But I did care. I cared too much. And that's why I couldn't talk to him. That's why I couldn't face him. Because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this. And the thought that maybe I couldn't fix it was too much to bear. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just nodded and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps retreating up the stairs. And as I stood there, alone again, I felt like the worst person in the world. That night, as I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, I kept hearing his voice. "Mom." It echoed in my head, over and over again. Soft, broken, like a plea for something I couldn't give him. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that we'd find a way to move on. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Deep down, I knew the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. I thought things would get better with time. I kept telling myself that if we just avoided each other, if we just pretended like nothing had happened, eventually, it would fade away. But it didn't. If anything, it got worse. The silence between us was louder than ever. Every room we shared felt like a war zone, with invisible landmines scattered everywhere, waiting for one of us to step on them. The tension was unbearable. And it wasn't just us who noticed. Other people did too. Cade was the first to say something. He stopped by one afternoon to pick up a box of old books he'd left in the garage. And the moment he walked into the house, I could feel him studying me, watching me. Cade always had this way of reading me, of knowing when something was off. And that day, he didn't even try to hide his concern. "You look tired," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter, like he still lived here. I shrugged him off, told him I'd been busy at work. But he didn't buy it. He kept pressing, asking if everything was okay, if something was wrong. And for a split second, I almost told him. I almost let it all out. But then, I stopped myself. How could I tell him? How could I look him in the eye and admit what I'd done? I couldn't. So I lied. I smiled, told him everything was fine. And eventually, he stopped asking. But the way he looked at me when he left, I knew he didn't believe me. And then, there was Tiana, Ethan's girlfriend. She'd been around a lot lately, popping in unannounced, trying to spend more time with him. First, I didn't think much of it. But then I started noticing the way she looked at me, the way her eyes lingered when I walked into a room. She knew something was wrong. Maybe she didn't know exactly what it was, but she could feel it. And that scared me, because if she kept looking, if she kept digging, eventually she'd figure it out. And if she did, if anyone did, I didn't know what I would do. I thought I was holding it together. I thought I was doing a good job, keeping my distance, keeping my emotions in check. But then, Peyton came over. She's been my best friend for years. She knows me better than anyone. And the moment she walked into the house, she knew, she felt it, that something was wrong. "You've been distant lately," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, like she was ready to interrogate me. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to lie to her, the way I lied to Cade. But when I opened my mouth, no words came out. I just sat there, staring at the cup of tea in my hands, praying she'd drop it. But Peyton, she never drops anything. "Come on," she pressed. "Talk to me. What's going on?" I could feel her eyes on me, studying me, picking apart every little thing. My face, my posture, the way my hands trembled when I lifted the cup to my lips. I knew I wasn't hiding it well. And for a second, I almost told her. I almost let it all spill out. But then, I stopped myself. Because how could I? How could I say it? How could I look her in the eye and admit the truth? I couldn't. So I forced a smile. and whispered, "I'm fine." Peyton didn't believe me. I could see it in her face. But she didn't push. She just sighed and said, "Okay." But the way she looked at me, like she was waiting for me to break, made my stomach twist, because I knew she wouldn't let it go. Not forever. And the worst part? I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep lying. The days stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Ethan and I barely spoke. The house was filled with silence, but not the comfortable kind. It was thick, suffocating, like we were tiptoeing around something too dangerous to acknowledge. But we both knew it was there. Neither of us could escape it. And then, one night, it all came crashing down. I had gone to bed early, hoping that maybe, if I slept, I wouldn't have to think. But I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop. I kept replaying it. Everything. The looks. The touches. The moment we crossed that line. I kept asking myself, how did this happen? How did I let it happen? But I already knew the answer. And the weight of it was crushing me. I wanted to escape, to undo it. But I couldn't. And the worst part? I didn't know if I wanted to. At some point I must have dozed off. Because when I opened my eyes, the room was dark. But I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw him. The presence of someone else. Standing at the foot of my bed. Watching me. My heart pounded. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. That my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, I heard it. A soft inhale. A quiet step forward. And then, "Mom." A whisper. Shaky. Uncertain. But full of something else. Something heavy. Something I didn't want to name. I sat up. My breath shallow. My pulse hammering in my ears. "Ethan." My voice barely came out. He didn't answer. Didn't move. Just stood there. In the darkness. And I knew why he was there. But I still asked, "What are you doing?" He exhaled. Like he'd been holding his breath. Like he'd been waiting for me to speak. And then, "I can't stop thinking about you." The words made my stomach twist. I shook my head. "Ethan, I know it's wrong." His voice cracked. "I know it is. But I don't know how to stop." I felt sick. I wanted to tell him to go. To leave. To pretend this never happened. But I didn't. Because I couldn't. Because something inside of me, some awful broken part of me, didn't want him to. And that was the worst part. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Because trust me, there's always more to uncover.